Hi, anyone and everyone. Welcome to Have You Heard About This Case? My name is Sam.
And my name is Kelly.
Today I am going to bring you another Wisconsin case. At this point, that's probably no surprise. And really, a lot of it's because Kelly and you and I just spent the weekend in Wisconsin for a friend's bachelorette party. So I just felt inspired that I needed to do another Wisconsin one. And I have the feeling that most of you have heard this case before. You've probably heard it a lot. But before we really kind of jump into it, what's our question for today?
So, Sam, we did just get back from Wisconsin and the bachelorette party, and it was so fun, including an element where a cover band played songs from the 90s and the 2000s.
Yes,
What?
they're amazing.
Yes, they were. What was your favorite song from their set?
Oh my gosh, that's so hard. Well, first off, they're amazing. If you're in Green Bay, check them out. They're Wet Possum.
Yes.
I truly highly recommend them. Such a fun show.
They did such a good
really
job.
Hard question. Exactly. They did a good job that it's hard to answer.
You guys, they did a good job for a long time. They played almost what, Sam, like a 3-hour set?
3 to 4 hours. They had a break in the middle, but
yeah,
I think it was probably around 4 hours.
Wow.
Yeah,
that was
I would have to say the best song, and this is kind of just because of the people that we were with. As we walked into the bar that they were playing, Learn to Fly by the Foo Fighters was playing.
Oh, yes. That was such a good moment. I'm so glad.
What made it so special, was so unbelievably special, was that the girl who is getting married that we had the bachelorette party for, I'm one of her best friends because we bonded when she came to stay with me and my sister to go to a Foo Fighters concert. So it was like the moment we walked in, this song came on and we just looked at each other like, we're meant to be here. This is it.
It was so perfect for you, the specific trio, including the bride, to hear the Foo Fighters right away. I know it's a very special band for you guys. And it was so much fun because not everybody was there yet. There was a giant concert that let out, and then everybody sort of came later, and we were there early, so we get to take the dance floor for it.
Yes, it was a lot of fun. What was your favorite song?
Ooh, okay. So I have this really long-standing relationship that I'm not essentially proud of, but it is a fact about me, which is that I really loved Fall Out Boy's Sugar We're Going Down. I love that song.
Who didn't? At least anyone who's our age. Who didn't?
I love that song. It's so good. And Sam's right. It's so hard to pick one because they also played what is the name of that song? You can cut this out if you want to. It is My Own Worst Enemy by Lit.
Lit, that's right.
That is one of my favorite songs from that era. It's so good.
Again, if you grew up around then, it had to be.
It's so good. But that was just fun and special.
The whole place, and that was after it got really crowded in there.
Mm-hmm.
The whole place just lit up, like no pun intended. But it was just everyone was obsessed with that song, and everyone who was there for the most part was around our age. So the whole place just went wild when that song started.
Yeah, it was very fun.
But let's dive into this case. This might be a little bit of a longer one because there's a lot of just craziness. And I know you're very familiar with this case. It's hard not to be.
I wouldn't jump all the way to very familiar because this one actually I didn't. Today. Yeah, this one I didn't tell you when you were researching it purposefully because I was like, it's been a while since I've checked up on what happened and since everything has gone on. that I sort of fell away from the story a little bit. And I know some parts of the end of it, and maybe some of the sentencing and things like that, but I don't know much about the actual crime itself.
Oh, I'm glad then, because I was a little worried this one might be a little over covered, but it's a very interesting case, and I think that there's a lot we can learn from it. I hope, at least. So today we're going to be talking about the attempted murder of Payton Isabella Leutner. And this is more widely known as the Slender Man Stabbing.
Okay. Yes. So that I vaguely remember.
It takes place in 2014 in Waukesha, Wisconsin. And at this time, Payton was only 12 years old, and she was in the 6th grade.
No, she's even younger than I thought she was.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's one thing that made this truly mind-blowing, is everyone involved in this is so young.
And that's, I think, why I fell away from the story a little bit, because I was so much this kind of young kid. And
me too.
You know, I was very much like this. And I was like, oh, anytime I read it, I just feel so terrible. And to know that she's only 12. And I mean, right around middle school is when you're still very trusting like that, but still very open to your own imagination. And
yeah. And even through my research of this case, I found myself, which I've never done before, but I found myself kind of relating to our suspects here as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were just kids. There's so many aspects about them that were just youthful that I think we can all relate to in one way or another.
Yeah.
And so that it was a little weird for me doing this like further deep dive, because I've heard about this case. I've known so many details of this case, but I read more into some of the personalities than I ever have before while doing my research. And it's like even with the people who did this to Payton, I found a lot of similarities. And it was kind of a weird feeling to know that like I have very similar things to people who did some very terrible things. Payton's parents, Stacy and Joe Leutner, described Payton as such an empathetic kid. By all accounts, Payton was incredibly compassionate. And she had this ability to really be friends with anyone while holding back judgment. We all know middle school, grade school, it can be rough. And the smallest little rumor flies and everyone just believes it. And Payton could see through a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
And like we've all experienced bullying at some point or another, whether it's minor or severe. We've all been through it at least a little bit.
Yeah.
And Payton didn't like this. Like she really believed that bullying was very unwarranted, and she had absolutely no issue approaching somebody who's being bullied and being kind of pushed away from the rest of the students and becoming friends with them.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't really care about the idea of like hanging out with the cool kids. She just knew everyone needed a friend. So when she was in the 4th grade, Payton met Morgan Geyser. And Morgan was sitting at lunch alone, because Morgan at this point was kind of known as the weird kid. And Payton, she just figured, I'm going to go sit down at lunch with her. And they became best friends.
Wow.
She's quoted saying, she was sitting all by herself, and I didn't think anyone should have to sit by themselves. And she's in the 4th grade, and I just think that's such amazing character.
Yeah. Yeah. What a very compassionate person, like we said. Like, that can't be overstated.
And Morgan says that for a very long time, Payton was her only friend. And that bond became even stronger because of that.
Mm-hmm.
And Morgan also gave Payton a nickname. She called her Bella.
Mm-hmm.
And I might be using Bella interchangeably a little bit. I tried really hard to keep Payton just for consistency and understanding.
Sure.
But please know, if I do refer to her as Bella, that is still Payton. A lot of the articles I was pulling from and reading were some said Bella, some said Payton. So it wasn't confusing because I'm so used to it through my research. But
Yeah.
I can understand that's they're very different names.
Yeah, she was just giving her friend a nickname, and when she was giving those quotes, I mean, she was probably still very young and just knew her kind of halfway as that and halfway as Payton.
Yeah, and her middle name is Isabella, so I'm assuming that Bella came from that. But it was a nickname that, for the most part, Morgan used more than anyone else for Payton.
Okay.
And then in between the 5th and 6th grade, Morgan made a new friend, Anissa Weir. And Anissa lived in the same neighborhood as Morgan, and they rode the same bus to school. And Anissa had just moved to the area. Her parents were going through a pretty rough divorce. And so she was struggling through that.
Yeah.
And when she became friends with Morgan, that really helped her. She really needed a friend.
Mm-hmm.
And Anissa was the new kid in Morgan and Payton's 6th grade class. So they quickly became a trio.
Mm-hmm.
But also at this point, Payton did kind of feel Morgan was pulling away a little bit because she was becoming closer with Anissa. Mm-hmm. And so even though they are this trio, it was kind of Morgan that was in the middle of the two of them. Okay. Payton and Anissa weren't super, super close, but it was still always the three of them hanging out with each other. Mm-hmm. And it was around that time that Morgan and Anissa had discovered Slender Man. Oh. Slender Man was first created as part of a paranormal image contest on the website Something Awful, which is basically just an online forum. You can post photos and videos, and there is, from what I was reading, a membership fee. So if you pay this membership fee, you get like full access and you can post your own things, and it's meant to be for people who are being creative, and usually it's something spooky related.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that era when it gave rise to Slender Man. And there were so many different images of it flying around, and I was like, I don't like that one bit. Not one part of that.
Absolutely everywhere.
It was everywhere, and every every corner I turned, there was Slender Man. I'm very upset. You see, I'm stuttering.
That was kind of the point of his character.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, and we'll get more into kind of what Slender Man is throughout this story here. But this started in 2009, so it was a few years old by the time Morgan and Anissa discovered it.
Okay.
But Payton was not a fan of Slender Man. It very much scared her. Yeah, it's understandable. But she did want to just go along with it because Morgan was really into it. And Morgan had this fantasy with it where it kind of created a divide between imaginary and real for her. And Payton's quoted saying, "I was supportive because I thought that's what she liked." Yeah, and this isn't necessarily super uncommon for a 12-year-old. You see something that is fake, and we'll get into kind of the more details of how it was created to begin with. But you see something and you want it to be real. So your imagination starts to run wild a little bit. And that was very much what Morgan was going through. And more than anything, I believe it was a desire to be real, at least early on. So Slenderman was created by a poster who went by the name Victor Surge. And he took part in a contest that was on Something Awful. And the goal of this contest was to create a paranormal image using Photoshop. So having a base real image, but then putting something scary in it.
Okay. I think I remember one of the first. I think I remember the original one before it was like sort of all encompassing in the art world with like various depictions. I think I vaguely remember the original one. Did it not have like very large eyes?
Actually it has no eyes. It kind of has no distinguishable features in its face. It really looks like, you know, those like green suits. So like you can blend in and it's like a full head to toe suit. And it's made for like green screens. It looks like one of those if you were to have that mask of that green suit on. And we'll post all of this on our Instagram so you all can kind of see what I'm referring to. But it basically, like, you had like sunken in spots for the eyes, the nose stuck out slightly, but there's no real distinguishable eyes or nose or lips. You just kind of saw the general form.
Okay, because I just remember it's been so like memed at this point and drawn at this point that I definitely forgot which was the original.
Yeah, the original in the images that Victor Surge posted, you can barely see anything at all. It in my opinion, it's very well done because it's creepy, it's cool looking. But his images were young teenagers or children, kind of he posted two initially. One was some teenagers looking like they're walking towards the camera, and in the far background, you saw the figure of Slender Man. And it was kind of blurry. It was meant to be kind of ominous and not really knowing what it was. And the second image were kids going down a slide. And again, he's in the background. And again, he's a little blurry. So you can't really see exactly what he is. But he's this very tall figure. He's often kind of described as Jack Skellington from Nightmare Before Christmas. They say he's about 7 feet tall. He wears a black suit. And a lot of depictions, which I believe came a little bit later, had big tentacles coming off of his back.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's gone through a lot of like iterations of what Slender Man is, and a lot of people kind of just ran with the story. But a big reason why this became so viral back in 2009 wasn't just because these pictures were creepy. It was also because the captions that Victor Surge added to his images. One of the captions said, "Yeah, we didn't want to go. We didn't want to kill them. But its persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and confronted us all at the same time. 1983, photographer unknown, presumed dead." So he's really creating this whole story from this one picture and that one sentence below it.
I was going to say that's pretty vivid and quite a narrative there.
It's really kind of cool in my opinion, but it's terrifying what happened with it. But really, when you're thinking about this, I feel like it is the starts of how people create horror movies or books and start these ideas. And I think that's all it was meant to be.
Yeah, that's what I think. I was going to say, I think the danger of this sort of comes with interpretation.
Exactly.
You know, and unfortunately, from some of the things I know, it's coming from a 12-year-old girl's mind. So.
And then the second photo captioned said, One of two recovered photographs from the Sterling Library blaze, notable for being taken the day of which 14 children vanished, and what is referred to as the Slender Man deformities cited as filmed effects by officials. Fire at a library occurred 1 week later. Actual photograph confiscated as evidence. 1986, photographer Mary Thomas, missing since June 13th, 1986. So again, another similar narrative.
Yeah, I was going to say, wow, that was a little bit longer. Good for you for being able to read that whole quote and sort of like what go, because there's a lot there.
There's a lot there, but it's 3 years later than the first part of the story that he created with the first image. So he's kind of perpetuating this idea that this Slender Man does something. So the first one was kind of saying everyone's presumed dead.
Right.
Kind of implying that they don't know where those people are. And then the second one goes a little further into detail, saying 14 children vanished. So it gives you a little bit more information there.
Right. Which is, again, interesting. And I think it's a good narrative in the place it is, which is a Photoshop contest of something spooky. I think that's great. But yeah, the danger, I think, comes probably a little bit in the viral nature of it, how it just got built on and built on and built on. And
this absolutely went viral. There were video games created out of this. People were making like short films and series on YouTube of all of these different stories that they expanded on these two original pictures and two captions. Okay. And that's part of how it got so widely spread with it.
Yeah. I remember seeing many incarnations of it online, and I didn't know that it went as far as like making a monster show about it or doing anything bigger. I thought it was just like something covered by artists a lot.
Yeah, it truly created its whole story. I believe there's a movie, which I didn't look this up. I think I've attempted to watch the movie, but I just didn't really get into it. I think a lot of that's because I know this case so well that it kind of feels a little weird to me. But I think Joey King is in it. So it's like not a nothing movie.
Right. I just remember when this all happened. Like, I was sort of a ghoulish, morbid little teen, but I felt like I was like, oh, I kind of aged out of the Slender Man thing. Like, I know that a lot of spooky little teens are now obsessed with it, but I think I was just a little too old. I just missed it. Sort of.
Yeah, me too. I heard about it a couple years after it gained popularity, once the video game came out.
Yeah, and a video game. I had no idea they did a video game.
Yeah, it was one of those games that was very viral for a very short period of time. It was one of those, like, a lot of people would have a friend of theirs or their partner or something play the game without telling them what it was and scare them.
Oh, okay.
So that was kind of the trend of it. It didn't last that long, but I definitely remember that going around YouTube in like 2011, 2012, I want to say, right around there. Okay. But let's jump back to our case. On May 30th, 2014, Payton and Anissa went to go celebrate Morgan's birthday. And they went to their local roller rink named Skateland. Oh. And then they returned to Morgan's house around 9:30 p.m. The three girls are 12 years old, and I can't really say that enough. And I really don't want to speak for you, Kelly, but I am sure that you've probably had many sleepovers in middle school. I know I did.
Oh, yeah. Totally.
And like, the goal is to always stay up all night long and just have fun.
Right.
And I can tell you, for me at least, most of the time we were very unsuccessful at staying up. We'd usually fall asleep not long after midnight. And this is exactly what Payton, Anissa, and Morgan would do at their sleepovers all the time.
Okay, so like when they got home, they probably didn't go right to it.
Well, this night was a little different.
Okay.
I don't know exactly what time they went to bed, but Morgan really pushed them to try to go to bed early.
Okay.
And this was kind of the first sign to Payton that this particular sleepover was a little different than many others that the three girls have ever had.
Oh, okay.
The next morning, they woke up. They had some donuts for breakfast. And I even saw an article where they talked about how, and this again is just like they're 12 years old. Like, it totally makes sense. They're 12 years old. But they crushed granola bars into silly putty and was throwing it at the walls and the ceiling. And like, that's just like reading through all of this. And we'll get to it. If you haven't heard of the case and you don't know exactly what happens, you'll be shocked. But that right there, like, they're 12.
Yeah.
Like,
absolutely. Yeah, they're 12. Yeah, they're 12. They're so on the border of childhood, you know?
Yeah. And after they're playing with their silly putty, they played dress up. And they really let their imaginations run wild. They loved to really create new characters for themselves while playing dress up. So they live in this like fantasy at that point. And then after playing dress up and probably getting silly putty stuck to the ceiling, they decided that they wanted to head over to the park.
Okay.
And they went to David's Park, which was close to where Morgan lived, just a short walk away. And while on the way to the park, Payton was walking just a few feet ahead of Morgan and Anissa. But during this walk, Morgan turned towards Anissa and wanted to show her something. What she showed her was a kitchen knife that she had with her.
Oh, I knew a little bit about this part.
And unfortunately, this was the first step in the plan that Morgan and Anissa had to sacrifice Payton to Slender Man. Okay,
so there's a lot here. There's a lot. I just remember when this case was coming out, I remember reading maybe just like the washed out sanitized version People magazine. But I do remember them vaguely touching that she was to be like a victim, a sacrifice to Slender Man. What I don't know, and maybe you'll teach me tonight, is how did these two 12-year-olds get there?
Well, we'll get there.
Okay. That's what I thought.
I will tell you right now, because this is a very sad and tragic case. And if you haven't heard it before, I'll give you a couple things because this is a hard one. They were caught within hours. And there's a lot of interrogation video, and we really do get explanations for a lot.
Okay.
Very quickly. Cool. So we'll go through all of that.
Yeah.
But they're starting this plan. And after they get to the park, they went into the public bathroom that is there. And it's a very, very typical park bathroom. It's a cinder block building. Really no windows, probably really disgusting, dirty toilets.
Yeah.
Public park bathroom.
Yeah.
And while in the bathroom, Morgan suddenly tries to restrain Payton, while Anissa attempted to hit Payton's head against the cinder block wall.
Wow.
But, yeah, like, scary.
That is scary.
And their attempt at this point was to knock Payton out.
Okay.
But Morgan ended up letting go of Payton, and understandably, Payton is confused about what her best friends are doing.
And was she ever knocked unconscious?
No, they were not
Okay.
successful.
Okay.
I believe
Wow.
that this wasn't a super hard hit.
Uh-huh.
This is just my speculation. I haven't seen it very clear in articles because also, understandably, it took Payton 5 years to talk about this publicly, and she was still pretty limited about what she said.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason I believe that it potentially wasn't that hard of a hit is because Anissa convinced Payton to go wait outside for a couple minutes, and then they'll meet up with her in just a minute. And so I feel like it could have felt like rough horseplay type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be why Payton didn't immediately check out of there. But also, she's 12.
Right. Okay.
She's 12.
And also, even if it wasn't a small hit, you just have had your head hit on Cinderbox, and you're only 12, so maybe you're a little disoriented.
Mm-hmm. And Morgan and Anissa have come out and said, in this moment, they kind of got cold feet, which is also another reason why I don't think the hit would have been that hard to her head, is because they both just kind of the moment it started, they both kind of just panicked.
Mm-hmm.
And so Payton leaves the bathroom, and Anissa confronts Morgan. And at this point, Morgan is kind of pacing around the bathroom and kind of singing and humming to herself.
Mm.
And Anissa also says that Morgan often kind of compared herself and kind of considered herself to be like a cat. And one thing that kind of came with this was Anissa, to soothe her down, would actually pet her. And that would help calm her down.
Oh.
So at this point, they need to come up with a new plan if they want to follow through with this sacrifice.
Right.
So Anissa comes up with the idea to play hide and seek in the woods, which is at the edge of the park.
Mm-hmm.
And as we were just kind of saying, I know a lot of people wonder why Payton just didn't immediately ditch her friends. But again, I can't say that it's enough. She's 12. She's also an unbelievably kind-hearted person.
Mm-hmm.
And since I don't think this attack was too rough, that it can kind of be considered horseplay, I'm sure it did scare Payton, and it probably did hurt at least a little bit. But not enough for her to really question the intentions of these two people who are supposed to be her friends.
Yeah.
And she didn't feel like her safety was at risk at this time.
Absolutely. She thought they were her two best friends. She should have felt utterly safe,
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So the three girls go off into this wooded area to play hide and seek. Initially, Morgan was the seeker while Payton and Anissa were hiding. And at this point, Anissa attacks Payton. But she wasn't able to hold her down because Payton was moving too much. And during this attempt, Morgan actually passed Anissa the knife. But Anissa immediately handed it back to Morgan. At this point, they really couldn't decide who should wield the knife because neither of them really wanted to. But Morgan kept a hold of it at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And really, this should be your time to stop. It should have never gotten this far. But if you can't determine who's going to wield the knife because neither of you want to, then neither of you should.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, this would be the perfect time to call it quits on the plan instead of make a new plan. But, I mean... Yeah. I don't want to
There's a lot more at play here. There's other things going on that we'll discuss later. A lot of stuff having to do with mental health.
Yeah.
So that's obviously a part of it.
Yeah, I imagine so, because it does seem like if you had gotten to the point where you wanted to sacrifice somebody to anything or anyone, it just seems like now's the point to back up.
Mm-hmm. And you and I can sit here and talk and say, like, this is when you should put down the knife. But neither one of us are going through these sort of mental issues that these two girls were going through at the time.
Right. Because they're
So it's like,
they're only
we want to
12.
say put it
Again.
down. Exactly. And they're children. But we can say, like, put it down, shouldn't be doing this. But their mindset is so incredibly different than ours.
Mm-hmm.
So with Morgan having the knife again, Anissa turns her back and starts to walk away. Mm-hmm. She walked about 5 feet, and then she said out loud, quote, "Kitty now, go ballistic, go crazy." And Morgan responded saying, "Don't be afraid. I'm only a little kitty cat." She pushed Payton and then began to stab her.
Oh.
She stabbed her a total of 19 times.
Oh. See, that's the thing. I knew it was multiple stab injuries in this case, but it's so many.
It's so many.
So many.
And this wasn't a very large knife. They classified it as a kitchen knife, but I've seen it described as like a vegetable knife or a steak knife. I'm not entirely sure if it was serrated or not. But you can imagine that being maybe 4 to 5 inches long. Like it's very, very deadly.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And
Rigby is attacking me.
Speaking of kitty cat. Speaking of kitty cat, I wanted to talk about that.
Like trying to bite me right now.
Rigby, I know. She said go ballistic, go crazy. Rigby, understand.
That is what he's doing. Oh my God, stop it.
No. So yeah, that phrase, like, go ballistic, go crazy, like, that just gives me, it very much creeps me out because it's like another sort of nickname. And
it is because she referred to herself as a cat. Like,
yeah,
that's really what they were doing.
Yeah. And it's like, I both struggle and sympathize with this weird mindset because they're children.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it excuses 19 stab wounds.
No, I agree. Payton had wounds to her arms, legs, and torso.
Wow.
And while being stabbed, she was able to yell out, "I hate you," and "I trusted you."
Oh, that is terrible. Because like we said before, these were 2 girls who were her best friends. She should have felt utterly safe.
Mm-hmm.
And she did. She trusted them with their safety. And
absolutely. You shouldn't even have to question it. You shouldn't.
No. And I can't imagine that kind of such vicious betrayal when you trusted someone.
Payton didn't ever question it. Like, we'll get to kind of some potential signs, but overall, this came as a shock to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But after Morgan had finished stabbing Payton 19 times, Payton tried to stand up.
Wow, that's incredible.
We'll get to more of what Payton does. She is such a strong young woman. It's truly incredible.
Mm-hmm.
But when she tries to stand up, she's like falling over. It's hard for her, obviously. Mm-hmm. And Anissa grabbed Payton's arm and guided her further into the woods and told her to lie down and be quiet. And Morgan also made a feeble attempt to try to cover her stab wounds. that
Oh,
she inflicted on her own friend by putting some leaves over them.
oh no. No. See, okay. So I understand that there's potentially some remorse here, but just coming from a wound care standpoint, uh, you could be potentially making this even worse. Like she could already be, I'm just thinking about 19 times and to the arms, legs, torso. Like the bleeding must have been already so incredibly traumatic. And
Oh,
then you're just sort
absolutely.
of rubbing forest dirt into the wounds that you created.
I don't think that they had the mindset to understand how additionally harmful that is.
Yeah, oh, I don't think so it either. I think at this point they're both very limited in their ability to respond to this situation because it really did just happen and they might still be in like fight or flight or still undergoing some traumatic mental health issue. I'm not sure.
Maybe.
But yeah,
So,
I don't believe they were able to understand that that would maybe make things worse.
yeah, I really don't think they had any inclination that that's even more harmful, potentially in the end.
Mhm.
But after they finished and left their friend to die in the woods,
Wow.
they went off to their local Walmart so that they could clean up in the bathrooms. And they continued to walk around Waukesha casually. They went
Wow.
to a furniture store. There was this, I'm not sure if it was a new furniture store or they're just doing a promotion or something, but they were handing out lemonade outside the store. They went and hung out there for a little while.
Wow.
And while walking around, they were even singing songs to each other. And
Wow.
while they're doing this, Payton is fighting for her life. And I really mean fighting. She found the strength to crawl towards the road where a cyclist found her.
Oh, see, I knew we were talking about like a survival story. So, but
She does survive.
that's incredible. Like and also like what uh, what great what great kismet. I keep saying that word, but what great kismet that this man, this cyclist, was going down that road at that time.
Exactly. And that she just had the strength. Like, I
She
don't
could
know
make.
how
She
far
made
the
it.
road was from where she was stabbed, but any
I was going to
distance
ask.
is
I was.
hard.
Yeah, you're right. You're right because yeah, I was going to say like, do we know? But either way, it doesn't really matter because she already had 19 stab wounds, probably incredibly traumatic stab wounds,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
probably an insane amount of bleeding. So
There were
it's
multiple
wild.
stab wounds that came close to major arteries that like barely missed. Like
Wow.
any of those that were slightly off to the side a little bit would have killed
Wow. Wow. Because yeah, any amount of dragging your body that long while you're losing that amount of blood is remarkable.
her. Yes. And so the cyclist obviously called the police and got her medical care that she desperately needed. And while she's in the hospital being prepared for surgery, and
Mm-hmm.
before the anesthesia officially took effect, the police asked Payton who did this to her. And Payton was able to tell them that this was her friends.
Wow. Wow. And like to have her faculties about her still when
Mm-hmm.
when she's being prepped for surgery. You
Like
know?
I'm reading through all of this, and I'm honestly thinking like this sounds like a Lifetime movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like
A
this
little.
sounds truly scripted. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's so unbelievably tragic, but
Yeah.
there's so much hope in everything that Payton did.
Right.
So after Payton was found and able to tell investigators who tried to kill her, police were immediately on the lookout for the other two 12-year-olds.
Mm-hmm.
That afternoon, they were found sitting in the grass not far from the interstate, and they were immediately taken into custody.
Okay.
And obviously that is all heart-wrenching, but this investigation gets more heart-wrenching.
Oh.
And as I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of interrogation videos.
Mm-hmm.
And both Morgan and Anissa did immediately admit to the attack.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also clear that both girls just didn't fully understand the impact of what they did.
Yeah, I remember thinking that because I just remember it was very quickly sort of tied up in a bow that they had confessed. And I was like, wow, I remember thinking, I don't know if they're old enough to understand the implications of everything they've just admitted to.
Anissa had asked the investigator who was interviewing her if she was able to go back to school because she was worried about her attendance since she hadn't missed a day of school since the 3rd grade.
Wow. Yeah. So,
like, she just doesn't understand.
Yeah, I was going to say, so she definitely doesn't understand. And whether that comes from these girls both being so young or because, like we've talked about a couple times, if there's some sort of undiagnosed mental health issue happening here.
It's definitely both, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So during these initial interviews, Morgan and Anissa fully explained their plans.
Okay.
And it really is more shocking than we could have thought. And I remember all of this happening when it came out. I had been in Chicago for about a year and a half after leaving Wisconsin. And I was familiar with Slender Man and the lore.
Mm-hmm.
And it just was hard to believe.
Mm-hmm.
And
because they're so young.
They're so young. And that's really what it kind of came down to, is they're so young, they're impressionable because of their age.
Right. Right.
And then to kind of have those factors, but then think these two young girls made a fully fleshed out plan to murder their best friend.
Oh God, yeah, that is so, like, I'm sure you'll tell me more about the investigation, but like I said, this is some of the stuff that I didn't get too deep into. I sort of just saw, that they had confessed to stabbing their friend in like a ritualistic manner towards Slender Man. I don't really know much else about what they set out to do.
So, obviously with Payton being their sacrifice, they had then intended to walk to the Nicolet National Forest, which is about 300 miles away in northern Wisconsin.
Oh.
They wanted to go there because that's where Slender Man's mansion was. So after they sacrificed Payton, they were going to go live with Slender Man in his mansion.
Okay, this sounds like something a 12-year-old would think.
Yes.
It's like, also, because 300 miles, you thought you were going to walk 300 miles. And then also, they didn't even make any moves like similar to this plan. They didn't even walk, they just walked to go get like snacks and they sang and they left their friend to die.
They did pack a couple bags, but there was really nothing beneficial for them. They did have a couple granola bars and some water, but really nothing else for a 300-mile walk.
Right.
But they believed that they were Slender Man's proxies, and by committing ritual sacrifice, he would protect them after completing it.
The thing is, like, I just don't, I know we can't really understand because it's coming from the mind of a 12-year-old. And, but I don't understand. Like, a ritual sacrifice is some deep, dark stuff that you're talking about at 12 years old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
New York Magazine put out I'm sorry. I was just going to say there's actual people involved here. There's your purported best friend is involved here, and you're thinking she'll be a good sacrifice?
Yeah.
That's so grim.
New York Magazine did a really fantastic article on this that gave a lot of insight, at least as much as we could potentially understand, into these girls' mindset.
Mm-hmm.
But they refer to Anissa's explanation of her actions during this like interview and interrogation as if she was presenting a book report. And I think that's a very good explanation after watching the interrogations, because you can go watch these. I've watched them all. There's a little more in her interrogation that we'll talk about. But both girls really gave very similar stories. But at the same time, their interrogations were very different from each other. Mm-hmm. Anissa was detailed, and this is kind of where the book report idea comes in. She very much stayed on track with all of her questioning, and she admitted that after stabbing Payton, she realized that Slender Man actually isn't real. And she was showing remorse at this time. She said that she didn't, but she was feeling remorse, but she didn't really show that she had fully grasped the severity of her actions. Mm-hmm. And I believe that once she heard that Payton survived, she thought that the punishment would potentially be pretty minor and she'd be able to go back to living her life.
I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't know how Payton's family is going to see that.
Not good.
Yeah,
I'll tell you that. Not good.
Yeah, I would imagine.
On Morgan's interrogation, on the other hand, was a bit more combative.
Ooh.
Well, Anissa's body language was very kind of hunched, which showed the signs of the remorse. She kind of curled up in herself a little bit more. Morgan was sitting shoulders straight. She spent a lot of times looking towards the camera in the interrogation room. And that New York Magazine article made a point in saying how the investigators react to having a camera in the room. Obviously, they're used to this. It is their job. They know it needs to all be recorded. But they very purposely try not to draw any attention towards that camera. But Morgan just kept looking at it.
I think I remember when this was all going down, I remember seeing a still of her doing that. It was accompanying one of the articles, and I remember thinking, like, something's not right here.
Yeah, she moved around. Yeah, she constantly like moved around a lot. She was wearing prison clothes, which really just very much looked like scrubs. But they were huge on these girls because they're adult sizes. They're not prepared for children's sizes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so at times Morgan, she was being really fidgety. She like pulled her arms into her shirt. And at times she was actually ducking her head into her shirt. Very different atmosphere than Anissa's interrogation.
Yeah. Yeah. It sure sounds that way. And it's another thing that kind of tracks for me in that I'm leaning a little towards more like little girl intentions with Anissa and a little
Uh-huh.
more like undiagnosed mental health issues with Morgan, but also being a 12-year-old.
Hmm.
That's kind of,
And I couldn't,
that's what I'm thinking. I don't know.
yeah, I definitely felt the same way when I was first hearing about all of this.
Hmm.
And I never really saw reports of Anissa's kind of education level. Like, they were all in the 6th grade, but it
Hmm.
was
Yeah.
reported that Morgan had a really high IQ for her age.
Oh.
And I think that's also kind of displaying here because often a higher IQ in combination with mental illness, this is behavior that isn't necessarily abnormal in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
And when investigators were asking their questions, a very, very common tactic is to ask the same or similar questions to ensure that they're being told the truth and that the answers are consistent with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Morgan caught on to this line of questioning, and she actually called out the investigator, saying that she has the right not to go into any detail if she didn't want to.
Wow. I mean, precocious, but also not alive. I mean, it's a little telling. It's a little calculated of a statement.
I think that's where her intelligence comes in. Because she does
Yeah.
know this, at least on some level.
Right. Right.
So Anissa told investigators that she introduced Morgan to Slender Man in October before the murder.
Mm-hmm.
October before the attack.
Uh-huh.
And then by December or January, they had started to plan out Payton's murder.
Okay. So hold one moment for me. Could you remind me again when the attack happens? Like,
May 31st.
okay,
So
so
it's 5-6 months of planning.
wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I just wanted to make sure I had that right.
No, it was a
That
long time.
is
It was a
that's a
long
long
time.
time. Yeah.
And
That's a
Slender
long time.
Man, it's considered a creepypasta. That's kind of just a common name for it. And for those who might not know, creepypasta is meant to be fictional, but meant to scare you.
Mm-hmm.
And with Slender Man images being created in a contest that was stated, create a scary fictional image using Photoshop. But Morgan and Anissa believed this was real. They really thought they were going to walk to the Nicolay forest and live in his mansion after murdering Payton.
Wow. Was there any connection at all from like the man who did this to Wisconsin? Or did
None.
these young girls
Absolutely
just okay. Okay, so they just
He's
sort
not
of
related.
made
He just
up.
created the image for a
Okay.
fictional contest. That's it.
And they just sort of made up that his mansion was going to be in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I don't know exactly where that came from.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was wondering. I was like, where did the angle of like this fictional character also has a mansion, but it's 300 miles away, still in state, 300 miles away.
Oh yeah, I'm not sure. There was, as we mentioned earlier, there were so many like spin-offs of Slender Man created by people that it's entirely possible that they read that on some forum that someone posted. But a lot of the stuff that was presented was kind of, they refer to it as new encounters. So they made these short movies and video games and all of this stuff. And a lot of the stuff that was coming out were kind of like found footage. Kind of like Blair Witch Project.
Okay. Okay, I see that. Like, I think that has value, and someone created something meant to be spooky again, and maybe, however, maybe it muddied the waters for these girls.
Yeah, well, if any of you remember when the Blair Witch Project came out, it was presented and marketed like a real event and real found footage.
I remember that. I remember
like
Blair
the
Witch.
website, everything.
Yes.
It was
Yeah.
truly marketed to say this was real, this was found. And that was all it was a marketing scheme.
Yeah, yeah. Because I think I remember at the very beginning of Blair Witch, it's one of those first ones to be like based on a true story, right?
Yeah, and if you go back and actually like look at how they did it, it's kind of genius. It really is. No one can kind of replicate that now because it's hard to create that sensation. But it was believed for a good amount of time that the Blair Witch Project was absolutely real because of their marketing.
I remember that era. There was a real time in a real place. Gather round, youths. There was a real time in a real place where we all believed that the Blair Witch Project was real, and if we went into the woods, we might get abducted by, like, I don't know, Satanists.
Yeah, we were pretty young when it came out, and I remember, we've talked about this a lot. I love scary movies. I grew up watching scary movies, but that was one that my parents were like, no, please don't watch this one. We live in the middle of the woods. That one will scare you.
Right. They're like, we don't have time for you to be afraid of the backyard. But I remember.
Yeah, exactly. My backyard.
There was an era where, like, my family lives sort of near the woods as well. And it was when I was quite young. But maybe it was just because I was quite young, but also a little fueled by Blair Witch, that I was not allowed to go to the woods behind my house because who knows what could be back there, you know?
See, we used to play in the woods. Like, what these girls did, let's go for a walk to the park, let's play in the woods. That was totally my childhood.
Oh, yeah, we totally did. Yeah, we totally did that as well. Just a lot of sort of running about. I remember in our elementary school, there was not even a fence around our playground.
Oh, yeah.
And so many of us.
Woods behind ours. It was just
so was ours.
Vast forest behind ours.
Exactly. And we used to just run in and out of the tree line. And then when I went back there, it was years and years after I was out of that school. And they finally had the fence. And I was like, oh my God, they walled off all the woods. Yeah, I was like, they walled off all the woods.
Back home, I should drive by mine and see if they have fence now.
I was like, they walled off the whole tree line. This place is a prison. How are these kids supposed to know how to go play in the woods? But yeah, there was a time when Blair Witch was real, so we all had to really be careful about the woods. And then, of course, it was just marketing.
It was marketing. But I think, obviously, because these girls, I'm not sure if they were even alive when Blair Witch came out. I don't know exactly when that came out. But no, they couldn't have been. That was 90s.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that they're too young.
But so they didn't obviously know that. They are seeing these things online that are being presented as quote unquote real and found footage.
Right.
That they bought into it. They believed it.
Mm-hmm.
And now let's get to some of the lore of Slender Man and what he does. He, as we know from those original captions, he's a child abductor.
Yeah.
And he lingers in the shadows and observes people. And some say that he drags his victims into the forest, disembowels them. And there's kind of no like reasoning for that. It just says that's what he does.
No, I don't like any part of this. I know some of it, and I'm learning more of it right now. And I'm like, I don't want no parts of it.
Yeah, no, it's not good. And then supposedly, if you spend too much time near him, you get what is called, quote, slender sickness. And this is where you become violently ill and you start coughing up blood.
Jesus.
And you feel the need to start scribbling and drawing and writing about Slender Man in these very chaotic types of drawings and writings.
Wow. That is so, I'm sorry. You only get to get out like 2 sentences before I'm like, wait, because everything is just, there's so much. So
that's only like a tiny bit of it. Like that's just
exactly.
scratching the surface.
You become violently ill and begin to cough up blood. I don't know, and maybe you'll get there, but did they just write all of this planning off as quote unquote slender sickness of them? Of like writing and scribbling and drawing and planning? No.
Technically, no. But when the girls were obviously apprehended, investigators checked out their bedrooms and their belongings and all sorts of their stuff just to kind of get a sense of what was happening here. Mm-hmm. And Anissa said that Morgan was the one who truly started to become obsessed with Slender Man. Mm-hmm. And in her bedroom, investigators found drawings of Slender Man that she created. They found writings and like scribbles, and a lot of these drawings and writings had a symbol on it that is a circle with an X over it. And supposedly, this is either supposed to protect her from Slender Man or to draw him closer. So I don't know which one it is, but that's how it's widely reported, is that symbol is to do either one.
And that symbol was documented in like many of her drawings?
Yes.
Okay. Oh.
And I've seen some of these drawings. They are very chaotic, scribbling.
Like manic.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it feels, to hear you describe it, it feels like it has a bit of a manic energy to it. And
I think it was partially like it was, I think manic is correct, but I do think a lot of it wasn't necessarily part of a manic episode. I think that was the style that all of the stories influenced. Mm-hmm. That's how you hear a lot of people talk about it, is this is what happens during Slender sickness. And so whether it was her own like choice of, yes, I'm going to do this like Slender sickness, or if it was part of some sort of episode she was having, I'm not entirely sure. But they might also go hand in hand with each other.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's there. You're highly suggestible. And if she knew, if she had heard that, this style of doing things would bring her closer to him, and that would potentially be beneficial, I can see why she was maybe doing it in that style.
That's what I'm thinking. And Anissa also says that it was Morgan who suggested that they kill Payton. And Anissa says that she didn't like this idea and she didn't initially want to be a part of it, but Morgan had persuaded her and changed her mind. Anissa says, quote, I didn't want to leave Morgan all by herself out there because I thought it would be cool to prove the skeptics wrong. And to anyone listening right now, if you have to murder someone to prove skeptics wrong, please just don't. And I know we're talking a lot about mental illness here and what could be involved in this decision making, but just that statement, if it's to prove somebody wrong, it's not worth it.
That statement is wild to me that it's coming out of a 12-year-old. And
there were a lot of times I'm reading these quotes and they sound very intelligent in some of their quotes. But then you remember they're 12. Yeah, and they're clearly greatly influenced by all of this.
Yeah, and it's wild that she said she didn't want to leave Morgan all by herself out there. And yet she is part of an attack with 19 stab wounds, and they leave Payton all by herself out there, alone, to die.
Mm-hmm. But also, think of it this
dissonance.
way, in their mindset, especially as 12-year-olds, Anissa and Payton weren't the good friends in the group. They weren't the biggest fans of each other. They both cared about Morgan. So her connection to Morgan, not wanting to leave Morgan out there, is a very different feeling to leaving Payton out there, because they didn't have the same relationship.
Okay.
So, but Morgan, on the other hand, said that Anissa was the one who created the plan to sacrifice Payton. Morgan said, quote, "She made it seem necessary, and I figured if it was necessary, then I would." So she's just basically saying the same thing that Anissa said, but the other way around.
Right.
And while there wasn't much found in Anissa's bedroom regarding Slender Man as there was to Morgan, a big part of this argument was that Anissa is the one who introduced Morgan to Slender Man.
Yeah, I keep trying to remember that in my head. Like, this is how she ended up having this is how the seed was planted. Yeah.
And they also both told investigators that this was essentially their third attempt to kill Payton.
What?
Yeah. So the reason they wanted to go to bed early the night before was because they wanted Payton to go to sleep while the two of them stayed up and then killed her. But they were too tired to stay up to kill her because they had so much fun at the roller rink that they were too tuckered out and fell asleep.
Wow.
Yeah, and then there was the attempt in the bathroom that we already talked about, and then their final attack in the woods. So they had 3 attempts at this.
Wow. Oh, God. This poor middle school girl, Payton.
6th grade. So
I was going to say, I'm referring, to Payton right now, because this poor girl is, again, just truly trusting. Truly trusting. And
she has no reason not to be. Like, until now, she had no reason not to trust her friends.
Right. It would never come to your mind that you're like, oh, maybe my 2 best friends are secretly colluding to murder me.
Yeah, there were times that Payton, obviously after all of this, but she had said that she was definitely drawing away from Morgan, and she felt like that was because of Morgan's relationship with Anissa. And that, like, she had other friends, and she was definitely pulling away from her more, but that's still your childhood best friend.
Right.
And they're very understandably, even though she wasn't the biggest fan of Anissa, she cared about Morgan and she trusted him.
Yeah.
So after they stabbed Payton, and before the police found them, Morgan says that she was, quote, surprisingly calm and that she felt nothing. But, yeah. And Anissa, she said she started to panic. And she said, quote, "I had a total nervous breakdown and I blamed Morgan for everything. I said, you stabbed her. You wanted this." Morgan is not one to cry very often, but finally she started to let go and started crying. So Anissa's really processing this at this point.
Right. It seems like she knows she did something wrong, and maybe Morgan doesn't necessarily know that until she starts breaking her down like this. Like, you stabbed her. You were the one. Like, she's pointing the finger, you know?
Yes. And I have a couple theories on this that we'll talk about a little bit later. Um, But before that point, Morgan clearly says she felt nothing after stabbing her friend 19 times.
That is so concerning. Like, oh.
And then Anissa says that Morgan told her that she essentially had a confession to make and that she had a side deal with Slender Man. She said that she was speaking to him telepathically, and they made a deal that if they failed to kill Payton, Slender Man would come and kill both of their families.
Wow.
So this obviously set Anissa off to panic more.
Yeah. There's a lot there again to unpack.
Yeah.
But the most important part is we have another two 12-year-olds who think that their families are going to be murdered. They're probably not reacting in the best way.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
So both girls were charged with first-degree murder as adults.
Wow.
There were attempts to charge them as juveniles, but the court determined that the severity of their crime warranted adult charges. And both girls were determined to be mentally fit to stand trial, but both girls would plead guilty to an insanity defense. They would plead guilty with an insanity defense. And they were tried separately.
Oh, I just that seems right to me. And it gets a little dicey when you think about when do we charge as an adult and when do we charge as a juvenile. But I think the severity of the crime warrants it. 19 stab wounds. I mean, we say this often, maybe on air and maybe more off air. We've talked about it with these multiple stabbings cases. Just sit there with yourself for a minute and count from 1 to 19. Yeah. And for every moment you counted was a stab wound to this girl's body.
And you have to think about it in that aspect as well of there's one person stabbing, physically doing the motion, while the other girl is standing behind and watching.
Ugh. It warrants an insanity defense. I mean, I think that if I were the defense team, that would be the first place I would go as well. Because while they were determined fit, it's good that they were determined fit to stand trial. But I do think there's some merit here to an insanity defense.
Yeah, and they were tried separately. Anissa was able to take a plea, and she was sentenced to 25 years in a mental health facility for attempted second-degree intentional homicide, since it was actually Morgan who's the one who stabbed Payton. So she was able to bring it down to second degree.
Okay. I mean, I think that the punishment, I mean, I don't know how much I feel about the charges. I think maybe she should have had to plead guilty to the first degree and then get her 25 years in the mental health facility. But I'm not at the negotiating table. Oh no. Okay.
I don't want to say what's coming up is necessarily a bad thing because I am not one to make that distinction, but we'll get to that in just a moment.
Okay.
So Morgan's trial was a little bit more complicated. She pled guilty to attempted first-degree intentional homicide, so that first charge stuck for her. And she was reviewed by multiple mental health professionals, and they had some conflicting opinions. They all did believe that Morgan suffers from mental illness, And that is at least partially to blame for her actions.
Mm-hmm.
But what they disagreed on is the severity of her illness and whether she was potentially faking some of her symptoms for some potential leniency.
Oh, okay.
So her defense team brought forward experts saying that Morgan suffered from schizophrenia and psychotic spectrum disorder, which attributed to her actions and the fact that she was telepathically talking with Slender Man, and the fact that she truly believed this was real and this fantasy and this lore actually had some substantial facts behind it, and that she could actually go to the Nicolay forest and live in his mansion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I was going to say with what they got from the interrogations alone, you could put forth that she was suffering from schizophrenia. It's, of course, we all mostly know that one of the most common symptoms of schizophrenia is hallucinations. And
yes,
this lore kind of, I imagine, would create and trigger some kind of delusion in someone who is
I think they fed that for sure.
I think, I think it feeds into that.
It is pretty rare to be diagnosed that young. And that was something that was really, that I think that's what created a lot of the debate during her trial.
Right.
Was it's not common to be diagnosed at that age. And I didn't put it in my notes here, but I didn't rewatch it for doing this script, but I have watched, there's a documentary on HBO about this case.
Mm-hmm.
And I do remember in that documentary, her father was also diagnosed with schizophrenia. He was older.
Oh, okay.
But obviously that has the ability to be genetic and clearly has impacted Morgan.
Right. Because I know that it's common from my understanding to be diagnosed with schizophrenia sort of when you're entering early adulthood.
Yeah, late teens, early 20s is very common.
Yeah, 20s. Yeah.
I've also heard that it can be diagnosed when there's major life changes, which impacts your mental state.
Okay.
So it's like,
then maybe it was like early onset of puberty that triggered this, and that's why some of the medical professionals went for it, and that's why some didn't. I'm not sure.
In relation to that, like from just what I know, which is not a lot, I haven't gone deep into this research, but from what I've heard, that's mainly in people who are older. It's like they've kind of lived with this for a lot of their life, but it went undiagnosed because it wasn't apparent. But it can get worse if you go through a major life change when you're older. Right. But that doesn't mean that exactly what you said couldn't be correct. I just honestly don't know.
Right.
But in the end, Morgan was sentenced to 40 years in a mental health facility.
Okay. I don't disagree that they were both sent to mental health facilities.
I don't either. I think that was absolutely the right call.
I think that's the move, because just with their ages and with all of these strange factors in the case, I don't disagree, because I know that mental health facility jails are still, I think, different than normal mental health facilities.
They are. And I actually do know where they are. And I don't know if they're both in the same one. I know minimally Morgan is there, but it's Winnebago Correctional Facility, which is a mental health facility. And I've known people who have worked there. I've also known a couple different people who have been there before as patients. And I've heard great things and I've heard terrible things. It's kind of one of those things. Like, it's a place where you don't want to be, But
right.
I've kind of heard both sides of it. And I don't want to go into details. There's a lot of privacy that I don't even want to come close to with people I know. But yeah, I've heard very good and very bad things. And I think that really just depends on what side of it you're on and what you're dealing with at that time.
Yeah. But I mean, we know that it's absolutely different from a regular mental health facility.
Yes.
So I do think it's right.
It's also very different than a prison. Like they're all are very different.
Mm-hmm.
In 2021, Anissa and her lawyers asked for a conditional release. The conditions were that Anissa had to be reviewed by 3 separate doctors to evaluate her mental health and determine if she was a risk to herself or others if she was released. And it was determined that Anissa was mentally stable, and she has since been released.
Wow.
So, and that's why, like I was saying, is like, yes, like what I was kind of alluding to before when you were talking about her sentencing, she has been released. And I think the call of having 3 separate doctors all evaluate her, it was really important in this.
Right. Do you know, I'm sorry, I can't math, and math is hard. How many years is that she actually did?
I think they were officially sentenced in 2017.
Okay.
So it was really only a few years.
Wow. Yeah, she didn't spend that long.
Yeah. But also think about it. They were, in 2014, they were 12. By the time she was released, she was 20.
Oh. Yeah, so that's a lot of
there's so much time in there at that age. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. There's a lot. So yeah, she probably showed she probably showed each of these 3 separate doctors all the work she had done on herself this entire time at these pivotal years, you know?
Exactly. And I think that she had a fantastic record while in Winnebago. She completed her GED. She wanted to go to college. So it was clear that she had worked on herself. I was pretty shocked when I read that news that she was applying for a release and then received it. But I think given what they required of her for that release, I don't necessarily disagree with it.
Yeah, because she did kind of instigate the attack, but she did not stab her.
I honestly am not sure if she instigated the attack. I think she introduced
you think that could
Morgan to Slender Man, but Morgan ran with it.
Oh, I was referring to when she yelled at her, like, "Get her, kitty, go berserk."
Oh, yeah, I think that is partially peer pressure in addition to mental illness with that. So earlier you mentioned the surprisingly calm attitude that Morgan had after stabbing Payton and then starting to cry after Anissa kind of pushed her and blamed her. I think that potentially could go towards what we were talking about during Morgan's trial. And some doctors thinking that she potentially was faking some of her symptoms. I think if that's the case, that she was faking some of her symptoms, and honestly, I don't know, and I don't want to say yes or no if she did or didn't, but if she did, I think that moment could have been part of that. Because being surprisingly calm and then
feeling nothing,
being blamed for it, but then going and getting some lemonade at a furniture store and hanging out in the grass.
Yeah, that's some dissonance.
So I could be totally wrong. That's just kind of my thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Morgan also filed a petition to be released. But this last August, she withdrew her request, and her lawyers say that she will file it again next year. So I'm assuming it's another conditional release that they're applying for. There wasn't a whole lot of information about it because it never went any further than filing it before they withdrew it.
Oh, okay. I just wonder, maybe they just didn't have like the breadth of evidence that like Anissa did to prove it, and they just needed time to gather that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, when I was reading about this, like when it first happened, there was a lot of talk about how people believe that, like, okay, Anissa did not seem to have as severe mental health issues at that time than Morgan did, which kind of came through the trial and the more complicated trial that Morgan had, that Anissa would more likely be one to be released early over Morgan. So I am curious if they withdrew her request because Anissa had just gotten released and that conversation was all over the media, that maybe they wanted to put a little distance between the release and then Morgan's attempt. That's again, my own theory, my own thought. But a lot of the articles were like, okay, Anissa, we can understand her potential release. Morgan, no. It's kind of how everything was worded.
Yeah, I see why you would think that. And I think that that's well concluded because, you don't want her to be in the media spotlight, and she did get the shorter sentence, and you maybe want to do it more quietly because Morgan did have the longer sentence, but they do want to try and get her out.
So we'll see. That's obviously going to be closer to a year from now that we would potentially see that release even just filed, that request for a release. But even with all of the coverage that we've seen in this case, even though like you're saying you don't know all the details, but you know the case, you're familiar with it. This shocked our country. 2 12-year-old girls attempting to murder their best friend by stabbing her 19 times. And some people still do believe that Slender Man is real. And I honestly don't want to blast out the website everywhere where I found this, because it was just an online forum, because I don't want to draw attention to this commenter, and where people could kind of lash back at them, because there were already a couple comments that I didn't like when I was seeing it to their response. But someone commented this in 2021, 2 years ago, that Victor Surge, who was the one who created the images to begin with for that contest, that he was not being fully honest about how he came up with the idea of Slender Man. They say that he was holding back information and that this wasn't just a figment of his imagination. They continue to say that they believe that he actually did have an encounter with Slender Man and that he had chosen to replicate his experience for this contest. Then they go on to say that they're unsure if he created this image from exactly this experience, or if it was kind of a distant memory and he convinced himself it was figments of his imagination, although it was technically real, or if he just didn't want to have people believe that he was crazy, so he said it was fake. So this commenter is really kind of coming after the creator, saying that, like, you're not telling the truth. I think you experienced this in real life, whether you realize it or you didn't.
I was going to say, wild to put so many words in someone else's mouth,
Yes.
That's a lot. It's a lot of words you just put into his mouth. Like, you can't trust your own imagination. You don't know what's going on. You just created it.
Yeah, and this commenter went on to say that they personally had an experience with Slender Man back in 2007, 2 years before the Photoshop contest. So, I don't know about that, but they also say that their mother, quote, mysteriously died not far from Waukesha, where Morgan and Anissa attempted to murder Payton. I don't know the connection here. They just put that in their comment.
This has got like Bigfoot energy.
Yes.
To me. Like, I saw it. No, he doesn't know what he's talking about. It's real. I saw it 2 years before I even drew it.
Yeah. And then they concluded their comment by saying no one should ever attempt to summon Slender Man. And they say, quote, I get people think that this is just a game. Trust me when I say you're playing with something you don't understand and you want no part of it.
Okay, so I don't disagree with this man, like, in this case particularly, because it can turn into something that you don't understand and want no part of if you're 12 years old, but it makes me wonder if this poster is also 12 years old or if this is a grown human.
Well, one thing I question with this, and I think this kind of adds to what Morgan and Anissa were probably seeing, is I wonder if this person who made this comment is just trying to rile people up and add to the lore.
Yeah, I mean, whoever it was certainly added quite a lot of lore.
Yeah, and so I just wonder, like, is this the sort of things that these girls were seeing at the time?
Right,
to make them believe it?
Yeah.
So I don't know if this person's just making up this whole comment, or if they themselves also believe it. I don't know. But I just thought I'd call that out because that post was in 2021. That was very recent, many years after.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
And then just to kind of conclude this, I don't want to get into too many details with this, but Payton is doing very well. And it seems pretty clear to me that she wants to live a normal life. So, like, I found out where she's going to school and, like, all this stuff. I'm not going to say it. She doesn't deserve people coming after her if she wants a normal life. But she is a college student, and she is researching psychology and gender studies. So, from everything I've seen, it sounds like she's doing great. And that she's had the ability to move on with her life.
Good. That's wonderful. Because I'm not entitled to the information at all. And I'm glad that she's able to live like a normal, private life. But I do feel so much like relief for her that she's able to carry on and do these things and just able to be such a strong person to overcome something like this.
Absolutely. And I don't know how she feels about Anissa's release. I know her parents were pretty upset about it.
I don't blame them. I do see that. I do see that as well.
Yeah. But she's since she stayed out of the public's eye, she hasn't done a ton of interviews. So I'm not entirely sure her point of view. But I do know at times she had talked about forgiveness. And I do think there's a possibility that she's okay with it as long as those doctors were correct and that she's not a harm to herself and a harm to other people. Because she just seems like that truly kind and caring personality. Any final comments?
I just, I'll reiterate that I'm glad that Payton survived this because it sounds like just a brutal, horrific attack on a lot of levels, and I just feel so awful that this child, she's a young child, she had to scream out, "I trusted you," while someone was
Yeah.
stabbing her. That's and when you said it shocked the country, you're right. I remember for when that headline first came out, it was like, oh my God, like what is happening that something this horrific could be perpetrated by someone so young? And
Exactly.
yeah, and I remember those interrogation videos were everywhere too. And I
They're
just
hard to
didn't,
watch. They're so
I,
hard to watch.
yes, I, that's when I fell away from the case because I was like, I just don't know if I can watch this interrogation.
Yeah, it's
But
really. I watched little clips for this research. Now I've seen them all before. I've seen them years ago, and I wanted to try to find the clips that I knew I needed to reference
mm-hmm,
for this episode without watching much more because it's upsetting to me. These are young
mm-hmm,
girls, and there's a lot of mental health going on here, in addition
mm-hmm.
to being young and naive.
Right.
And it's just
Exactly.
it's gut wrenching. And as I was saying in the
Yeah.
beginning, I felt a lot of similarities between these two girls because I was into really spooky stuff. If I was 12 when Slender Man became popular, I'm sure I would have been into that. Like if
Oh,
I was that age when it came out, like I guarantee you I would have been interested in that. So I found so
yeah.
many
Oh,
similarities with them in that way that it's
yeah.
hard.
Yeah. I do feel that vibe, I mean, that's why I said, like, sort of, we were, we had that whole period where we thought the Blair Witch was real. And, like,
Mm-hmm.
my goddamn, when I was 12 years old, I was like, I can't go into them woods or I'm going to get sacrificed.
Yeah, and like
So if this
Paranormal
came out when
Activity is
I
another
was,
one that came out when
yeah,
we were in like high school or college. That was
yeah, if
kind of the
this came
same
out,
story.
yeah, if this came out when I was a kid, I 100% would have been aware of it and probably like, oh no, we can't go over there because Slender Man might come. Like,
Yeah.
I was so aware of all that stuff.
But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this case and thank you so much for listening to Have You Heard About This Case? If you did enjoy this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And you can find us on Instagram at Have You Heard About This Case Pod. You can find us on TikTok at HYHATC, or you can email us at haveyouheardaboutThisCase@gmail.com. Thanks, and we'll talk to you later.
Bye.